My grandmother was murdered by my grandfather when my mom was a little girl. It was never proven, but we know it. When my mother was 11, she was at home with my nurse grandmother and abusive grandfather. My mom had a pretty tough childhood and still wet the bed every night. She had two older siblings, but they were all moved out and stuff. Anyway, my grandmother was a nurse, as I said before. She gave herself a vitamin shot every day. She just administered it to herself, no big deal. She had been doing this as long as my mother can remember. Well, on this particular night, there was a lot of fighting. Threats, crying, physical violence, the whole 9 yards. As my mother is going to bed, her father stops her and offers her a glass of Coke. Of course she says yes, without wondering why an adult would offer a notorious bedwetter a drink at bedtime. The next morning, my mother wakes up to her 22-year-old sister shaking her and screaming for her to wake up. My mom woke up but said she felt dizzy and sick. She didn't quite understand why her sister was there and why she was screaming. Apparently the night before, about an hour after my mother went to bed, my grandmother gave herself a fatal overdose of insulin. She only kept the insulin in case of emergency for my uncle. My aunt saw the body and said she had bruises and the injection spot had multiple pricks. This was back in the 70s, and after telling the police his wife was a heavy drinker and suicidal, they dropped the case. After my grandmother's death, my grandfather literally just packed up and left, without his 11-year-old daughter. My mom ended up growing up in group homes and has some terrible stories from her youth. She actually ended up turning into an alcoholic to reclaim her youth, and that killed her 2 years ago on her 46th birthday. Nobody in my family has spoken to him since the 70s. He may have approached my mother in the 90s, she wasn't sure, but he took off after making a racial slur about her biracial children. Even if he was around, he would not be in my life. Then, Jost story time. The first one was right after my grandmother died in the same house. My aunt moved in after my grandfather left to try to take care of my mother. It didn't work out, but that's beside the point. Anyway, my mom gets home from school one day and my aunt is sitting on the driveway, pale and shaking. My mom asked what was wrong, and she said she refused to go in. She said she heard something weird in their mother's room. They didn't really go in there. Grandma liked her personal space in life, out of habit, except to occasionally clean. So my mother approached the door, wondering why her sister was being an idiot. As soon as she touched the doorknob, the entire door shook like someone slammed into it. This was accompanied by an almost comical roar. My mom immediately opened the door because she didn't believe it was anything but an idiot dog. Not a thing in the room, and nothing was out of place. My mom said she was more curious to its origins than scared. Same house, same time frame. My mother was in her own bedroom, doing whatever by the window. She happens to glance out her window at her mother's. Their windows faced each other over the backyard patio. She just sees the heavy velvet drapes in the room swishing back and forth really hard, like someone was swinging them. She ran to her mother's room, and the curtains weren't even fluttering. This last thing, I'm not sure how factual it is. I've never actually researched it, but it's common knowledge in my family. After my mother moved out of the house into a group home, the house was sold to a newlywed couple. A few months after they moved in, the dude went nuts and chopped his wife into multiple pieces. He then dumped those pieces in the mountains and tried to pretend she never existed. My family likes to use this as proof that something evil was in the house.